When I opened that hotel room door, I didn't expect to see my wife of 35 years, laughing in another man's arms. The sound of her laughter was soft, familiar, almost cruel in how normal it felt. It wasn't the affair that shattered me. It was the ease on her face, the peace in her eyes, like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. My hands shook, the coffee I'd brought spilled onto the carpet, and I realized sometimes the deepest betrayals don't scream, they whisper. Stay with me. You'll want to hear this story. My name's Daniel Parker. I turned 60 last spring, the same week my wife, Linda, forgot our anniversary for the first time in 35 years. She didn't mean to, at least that's what she said. She'd been so busy with a new project at work, a big pitch that had taken all her focus. I smiled, told her it was fine, that anniversaries were just dates, but the truth was, it hurt. Not because I needed flowers or a card, but because it was the first time she didn't even remember. For 35 years, Linda had been the one who never forgot anything: birthdays, doctor appointments, even the date we bought our first house. That day, she didn't even look up when I said, "Happy anniversary, sweetheart." She just murmured, "Oh, right, that's today," and went back to typing. I stood there in the doorway of her office, holding a small box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a charm bracelet she'd once pointed out in a boutique window downtown. She'd said, "Maybe when I retire I'll wear something like that, something that reminds me of us." I thought she'd meant it. But people change quietly. They don't announce it. They just start moving in different directions while you're still walking the same old road, too busy watching your step to notice they've taken another turn. For most of our marriage, Linda and I were a team. We raised 2 kids, bought a modest home in Ohio, built a life on routines: morning coffee at 7, weekend grocery runs, Sunday walks in the park. I worked as a high school history teacher for 30 years. She worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company. Our lives were simple, predictable, and I thought that was enough. Maybe that's where I went wrong. After I retired 2 years ago, I expected life to slow down for both of us. I pictured mornings reading the newspaper together, maybe traveling, visiting our daughter in Boston or our son in Denver. But for Linda, retirement wasn't part of her vocabulary. She loved her job, the energy, the younger co-workers, the constant movement. "You wouldn't understand," she said once when I asked if she'd ever think about stepping back. "Work keeps me alive, Dan. It gives me purpose." At first I admired that. Then I started noticing the little things. Her new perfume, something sharp and floral, nothing like the soft vanilla scent she'd worn for years. The late-night emails that made her smile at her phone screen. The gym membership she suddenly renewed after a decade of ignoring it. And the laughter, God, that laughter. It wasn't the sound of joy I used to hear when we danced in the kitchen to old country songs. It was lighter, secretive, the kind of laugh you share with someone who makes you feel seen in a way you haven't felt in a long time. One evening, I came home from the hardware store and heard her on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice was low, tender. She said, "You always know how to make me smile." I froze. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, she jumped, fumbling to end the call. "That was just Karen from the office. She's been having a tough week." I nodded. I didn't want to embarrass her. But the name didn't match the tone. People don't speak to coworkers that way. Not after 35 years of marriage, not with that softness in their voice. After that night, things between us shifted in ways only a husband who's been around long enough could feel. She started leaving earlier for work, coming home later. The texts she used to send during the day, little notes like, "Don't forget the dry cleaning" or "Pick up milk," stopped coming. When we did talk, it was about bills, appointments, or her new team project. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid, jealous, insecure. I even felt guilty for thinking she might be capable of betrayal. Linda was the mother of my children, the woman who held my hand through my father's funeral, who sat beside me through every broken moment life threw at us. But one morning, I found something that tore away all denial. It was a receipt tucked into the pocket of her coat. A dinner bill from a hotel restaurant, the Carlton, downtown. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of red wine, and 1 dessert. The date was last Tuesday, a night she'd told me she was working late on the big pitch. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour, staring at that slip of paper. The numbers blurred, the ink smudged from the sweat of my hands. I tried to tell myself it meant nothing. Maybe it was a work dinner. Maybe she'd gone with her team. But then I saw the handwriting on the back. Thank you for the best night I've had in years. Her boss's name was Martin. I remember standing up so fast the chair fell backward. My heart was pounding in my chest, not with rage, but disbelief. I'd seen enough teenage dramas and late-night talk shows to know what an affair looked like. But not her, not Linda. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye like nothing had changed. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, the morning sun glinting off the windshield, and thought, you can't love someone for 35 years and not know when their heart is somewhere else. That day, I started noticing everything I'd ignored before. The way she kept her phone face down on the table, the sudden bursts of energy when she got a text, the soft humming she did while getting dressed for work, an old habit she used to do before dates, not office meetings. She even started buying new clothes. Not for me, for someone who made her feel new again. I tried to confront her once, just gently. Linda, I said one night as we were cleaning up after dinner, you've been distant lately. Is something wrong with us? She froze, a dish still in her hand. Then she forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. No, Dan, don't be silly. I'm just tired. Work's been exhausting. I nodded, because what else could I do? You don't accuse your wife of 35 years without proof. You don't destroy the life you've built on a hunch. But that night, when she went to bed, I checked the drawer where she kept her jewelry. She'd started wearing a new bracelet, silver, simple, elegant. I'd never seen it before. The same kind they sell at the Carlton's boutique downstairs. That was when I knew. The next few weeks were a blur of confusion and silence. I'd wake up early just to hear the sound of her getting ready, hoping to find something familiar in her routine. But even the way she brushed her hair had changed, slower, more deliberate, as if she was trying to impress someone new. Every small act became evidence, and every piece of evidence felt like a knife. Still, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Maybe it's because when you've shared a life with someone for 3 decades, your anger has nowhere to go. It loops back into love, then into grief. One Friday, she called to say she'd be working late again. I waited. I watched the clock crawl past 9, then 10, then midnight. When she finally came home, she smelled of perfume and red wine, and she smiled at me the way you smile at a stranger you feel sorry for. That was when I stopped asking questions. I just started paying attention. I've always believed that when something feels wrong in your gut, it usually is. You just don't want to face it yet. And I didn't, not at first. I wanted to believe that Linda was still the same woman who fell asleep on my shoulder during late-night movies, the woman who made grocery lists in the margins of her crossword puzzles. I told myself the long hours, the perfume, the new clothes, all of it were part of her midlife rediscovery. Maybe she just wanted to feel young again. Maybe I should have joined her instead of watching her drift away. But the truth has a way of showing up, even when you beg it not to. It started one Saturday morning. I woke up to an empty bed. The sunlight was streaming through the blinds, and her side of the blanket was already cold. She'd left early, she said, to meet a client for brunch. A client. On a Saturday. I made myself coffee, sat at the table, and stared at her car keys hanging on the rack, except her spare set was missing. She always took the spare when she didn't want to be tracked by the GPS app we both had installed for safety. That was the first time I realized she didn't want me to know where she was going. Something inside me, something old, quiet, and stubborn, told me to find out. Not because I wanted to catch her, but because I needed to know if I was crazy for feeling what I felt. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for clarity. So, I got in my truck and drove. Slowly, aimlessly, pretending I was just running errands. But when you've loved someone for 35 years, you know their habits better than you know your own. I had a hunch where she might be. Downtown. The Carlton Hotel sat on the corner of Main and Pine's sleek glass building, a rooftop restaurant, the same place from that dinner receipt. I parked across the street, telling myself it was just coincidence. Maybe she really was meeting a client. Maybe I'd see her sitting with a group of people talking business. But when she came out of the hotel lobby an hour later, she wasn't alone. She was with him. Martin. I recognized him from the few company events I'd attended years ago. Tall, sharp suit, grey at the temples. The kind of man who still looked like he jogged before work and drank the right kind of wine. He was maybe 5 years younger than me, but there was a smugness in his smile, the kind that belongs to someone who thinks they've won something that isn't theirs to win. They were walking close, their hands brushing, and then just before they reached the parking lot, she turned to him, laughing, the same soft laugh that used to be mine. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, and she didn't pull away. I didn't take pictures. I didn't follow them. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers went numb. My heart didn't break like glass. It cracked like old wood, slow, splintering, leaving jagged edges you can't sand down. When I got home, the house felt heavier. The walls, the furniture, even the clock ticking above the mantel, everything seemed to echo with silence. I stood in the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals and realized I didn't recognize the woman I'd built my life around anymore. That night, she came home cheerful. She kissed my cheek and said, "You'll never guess Martin's team landed the contract. We're celebrating next week." Her tone was light, casual, too casual. She didn't notice that I didn't smile. I just said, "That's great, honey," and walked to the garage. That's where I let myself crumble. I sat on my old workbench, the one I'd built when our son was still in diapers, and just stared at my hands. The same hands that had fixed her car, painted her kitchen, held her when she cried over her mother's passing. They'd done everything for her, built, carried, comforted. Now they were shaking because I didn't know what to do with them anymore. It took me a week to gather the courage to talk to someone, my friend Tom. He'd been my neighbor for 20 years, widowed for 5. The kind of man who didn't say much but listened when it mattered. We met at the diner down the street. He took one look at me and said, "You look like a man who's seen a ghost." I told him everything, the receipt, the hotel, the kiss. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he sighed, stirring his coffee slowly. "Dan," he said, "you can't fix a marriage someone else stopped fighting for. You can only decide what kind of man you'll be when it ends." That line stuck with me. It looped in my head all night. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to ruin her life. I just wanted my dignity back. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started keeping a journal. Each night, I'd sit at the kitchen table and write down what happened that day. Not for proof, not for court. For me, to make sense of the chaos. The entries started simple dates, times, places, but they slowly turned into memories. Moments I didn't want to forget: our kids' birthdays, our trips to the lake, the sound of her laugh before all this. Sometimes I'd write, "Where did we go wrong?" and just stare at the page for minutes. The pen wouldn't move, because I didn't have an answer. One afternoon, she came home early. I was sitting in the living room with my journal open, lost in thought. She looked at me, confused. "What's that?" "Just something I'm working on," I said. She smiled faintly, the way you smile at a child drawing a picture you don't understand, and went upstairs. That's when I realized she didn't ask what I was writing about because she didn't care to know. 2 weeks later, she started talking about traveling for work. "A conference in Chicago," she said. I nodded, helped her pack, even drove her to the airport. She hugged me goodbye, promised to call. She didn't. Not that night, not the next. On the 3rd day, she texted, "Sorry, long meetings, exhausted, will call soon." But she didn't call. So I checked our credit card statement online. I wasn't spying, I was protecting what was left of my sanity. That's when I saw it. The charge wasn't from Chicago, it was from Nashville. A boutique hotel. 2 nights. Room service for 2. My breath caught. I didn't need to guess who she was with. When she came home that Sunday, tan from the Tennessee sun, humming to herself, I didn't say a word. She kissed my cheek again, that same rehearsed gesture that meant nothing, and asked, "Miss me?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to ask her why, but I didn't. I just said, always, because that's what a man says when he's not ready to lose everything in one breath. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside on the porch, the cicadas humming in the dark, and thought about the decades that led to this. How love starts as a fire, becomes a routine, and sometimes turns into smoke. You can't hold smoke. You just breathe it in until your chest hurts, and then exhale, hoping some of it leaves you. In the quiet, I realized something. I'd been mourning a marriage that died long before I found out about the affair. I just hadn't buried it yet. That's when I decided to stop searching for proof. I didn't need photos or recordings. I didn't need to play detective. I had enough truth to last a lifetime. The next morning, I made her coffee 2 sugars, no cream, just like always, and watched her sip it distractedly as she scrolled through her phone. She smiled at something on the screen, probably him, and I felt nothing. No rage, no jealousy, just an empty, quiet kind of acceptance. The kind that comes when you realize the person sitting across from you isn't your enemy. They're just a stranger wearing the face of someone you used to love. That was the day I promised myself something. If I couldn't save my marriage, I'd save myself. The morning I decided to talk to Linda, the house was unusually quiet. No humming from the kitchen, no scent of her perfume drifting through the hallway, just silence. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something to break. She came downstairs around 8, dressed in a soft blue blouse I hadn't seen before. Her hair was different, shorter, with lighter highlights. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked, and how strange it was that beauty could still sting. I poured her coffee. She thanked me without looking up. The clinking of her spoon against the mug filled the air like small hammer strikes. I watched her scroll through her phone, her thumb moving in lazy circles. Finally, I said, "Linda, can we talk?" Her head snapped up, startled. "Of course. What's wrong?" That question, what's wrong, it carried a weight she didn't seem to understand. There had been something wrong for a long time. We'd just stopped saying it out loud. "I think we both know things have changed," I began. "I don't want to argue. I just want honesty. Are you seeing someone?" She froze. The pause stretched long enough for the clock on the wall to tick 5 times. Then she set her mug down carefully and said, "Dan, I..." She didn't need to finish. Her eyes said everything. I'd seen those eyes hold 1,000 emotions. Joy, anger, exhaustion, but never guilt. Until now. "It's Martin, isn't it?" I asked quietly. Her lips parted, then closed. She didn't deny it. A strange calm settled over me, like the world had gone soft around the edges. My hands weren't shaking. My voice didn't rise. I just sat there, breathing slowly, as if I were in a doctor's office receiving bad news I'd already expected. "How long?" I asked. She looked away. "About a year." A year. 12 months of breakfasts, dinners, birthdays, all lived beside a lie. "Why?" I whispered. Her voice trembled. "I don't know. It just happened. We started working late, talking more. He listened. I felt seen again. And before I realized what was happening, it was too late. Too late." That phrase hit harder than the confession itself. Like love was a car crash she couldn't stop. "Did I stop seeing you, Linda?" I asked. "Was I not enough anymore?" She shook her head, tears welling. "It's not that. You've always been good to me, kind, safe. But after you retired, you seemed so lost. I didn't know how to reach you. I needed something different." "Something different," I repeated. The words tasted bitter. She reached across the table, maybe to touch my hand, but stopped halfway. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I was going to end it." "When?" Silence again. "Before or after your trip to Nashville?" Her breath caught. Her eyes widened, a flicker of shock, then shame. She knew I knew. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter," I interrupted gently. "You've already told me enough." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like I'd been carrying her confession for years. "I'm not going to shout," I said. "I'm too tired for that. I just need time." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Dan, please." But I was already walking toward the door. Outside, the air was cold and clean. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and for the first time in months, I felt it a small thread of peace weaving through the ache. I drove with no destination, letting the road decide. The world looked different that morning, clearer, quieter, the way it does after a storm, when everything is washed bare. I ended up at the lake, our lake, the one we used to take the kids to every summer. The benches were still there, though the paint was peeling now. I sat on the one near the dock, hands clasped, eyes on the still water. That's when I realized I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger had burned itself out, leaving only a quiet sadness, the kind that feels like an echo of love. I thought about all the years we'd spent building a life together, the house, the family, the holidays, how easy it is to mistake routine for connection, proximity for love. Maybe I'd stopped seeing her too, not because I stopped caring, but because we both got lost in the smallness of everyday life. The same conversations, the same meals, the same unspoken expectations. Somewhere along the line, we forgot to choose each other. Love, I realized, isn't something you fall into once. It's something you keep choosing, and somewhere along the way, we both stopped making that choice. I stayed at the lake all morning, watched ducks glide across the surface, sunlight flickering on ripples. Simple things, steady things, things that didn't lie. By noon, I drove home. Linda was in the kitchen, sitting at the table where I'd left her. She looked up when I came in, eyes red, face pale. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't," I said softly. "We've said enough for one lifetime." I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the sink, staring out the window. "I'm not going to hate you, Linda. That's not who I am. But I can't stay here pretending we're fine." She nodded slowly. "Are you leaving me?" I turned to her. "I think we both left a long time ago." That night, I packed a small bag, a few shirts, some essentials, my journal, nothing else. The rest of my life was still in that house. Photos, furniture, memories, but none of it felt like mine anymore. Before I walked out, I paused by the living room wall where our family portraits hung. There was one photo from our 25th anniversary, Linda in a red dress, me in a grey suit, her hand resting lightly on my chest. We looked happy. Maybe we were. I didn't take the photo down. Some things are meant to stay where they are, even when they hurt. I checked into a small inn near the lake that night. The room smelled of old pine and clean sheets. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. Sleep didn't come easy. My mind replayed our life in fragments, her laughter, the kids' voices, the little house we'd built from nothing. For a moment, I wanted to rewind it all, find the exact point where we started drifting apart. But life doesn't work like that. There are no rewind buttons, no clear signs, only choices we didn't know we were making until it's too late. The next morning I woke early, stepped outside, and felt something I hadn't felt in years' space, room to breathe. I spent that day walking around the town, visiting old places, the diner where we used to have Sunday breakfast, the bookstore where she'd browse for hours. Each spot was heavy with memories, but instead of breaking me, they started to soften. Grief, I learned, doesn't always come in tears. Sometimes it comes in quiet acceptance, in knowing you can miss someone deeply and still wish them peace. That evening, Linda called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to hear her voice one last time. "Dan," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." "I know," I replied. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I know that too." A long pause. Then she said, "I never stopped caring about you." I smiled faintly. Maybe not, but sometimes caring isn't enough. She started crying and I listened. I didn't tell her to stop, didn't try to fix it. We'd spent decades fixing things, kids' problems, bills, broken faucets. Maybe this was the one thing that wasn't meant to be fixed. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the sun was setting over the lake, painting the water gold. I realized then that I didn't want revenge. I didn't want her to suffer. I just wanted peace for both of us. I picked up my journal and wrote, "Today I let go, not of her, but of the version of me that couldn't live without her." The first weeks after I left home were the hardest. The silence that used to comfort me started to feel like a living thing, breathing in the corners of that small inn room. Mornings came slower. Coffee didn't taste the same without the sound of another cup clinking beside mine. I'd catch myself turning to say something to her, forgetting there was no one there to answer. It's funny how habits hold more of a person than their presence ever could. You don't realize how many invisible threads tie your life together until they start to snap, one by one. I filled my days with small tasks, long walks by the lake, fixing things for the old owner of the inn, reading the paper cover to cover. I'd always been a man who found comfort in structure, and structure was all I had left. Some days I felt fine. Other days I'd wake up and the grief hit like a wave, sudden, cold, unstoppable. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet, wondering how something as ordinary as love could leave behind such extraordinary emptiness. After 2 weeks, I called my daughter, Emily. She's 32, lives in Boston with her husband and their 2 little girls. I hadn't told her what happened yet. I didn't want to worry her, but pretending got heavy. "Hey, Dad," she said when she picked up. "You sound tired." "I am," I admitted. "There's something I need to tell you." When I told her that I'd left her mother, there was a long silence. Then she whispered, "I knew something was wrong." That surprised me. "You did?" "Mum's been different lately, distant. When I visited last Christmas, she was glued to her phone. I thought maybe it was stress, but I could tell she wasn't happy." I swallowed hard. "Neither of us were, Em. We just didn't say it out loud." "Em, I'm so sorry, Dad," she said softly. "Do you want me to come down?" "No, I'll be fine. I just needed you to know." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me about the girls, her work, small, ordinary things that somehow made the world feel normal again. When we hung up, I felt lighter. The next call was to my son, Michael, who lived in Denver. He's quieter than Emily, more like me. When I told him, he didn't ask for details. He just said, "I'm sorry, Dad, you didn't deserve that." No, it was simple, but it was enough. Hearing my kids' voices reminded me that not everything I'd built was gone. Some things had survived. They were living proof of it. A few days later, I went back to the house not to talk, just to gather my things. Linda wasn't there. She'd gone to visit her sister. The house looked the same, but felt completely different. I walked through each room like a ghost revisiting his life. The couch where we used to watch movies. The kitchen where she'd stand barefoot making breakfast. The hallway lined with pictures, weddings, birthdays, holidays. I stopped at one photo in particular. Our family at Yellowstone, all of us in matching rain jackets, smiling despite the downpour. I didn't take it down, but I did take my guitar from the corner of the living room. I hadn't played it in years, but I needed something familiar that still belonged to me. Before I left, I wrote Linda a note. "I'm not angry anymore. I hope you find what you're looking for. Take care of yourself. Dan." That was the last message I ever left her. Back at the inn, I started playing the guitar again. My fingers were stiff, clumsy, but the music came back like an old friend who didn't need explanations. Some nights I'd sit outside under the porch light, playing quietly to the crickets and the sound of waves against the dock. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was peace. The innkeeper, Mr. Harris, was a kind old man who lived upstairs with his dog, a golden retriever named Scout. He'd often sit with me in the evenings. We didn't talk much, just 2 old men sharing silence that didn't feel heavy. One night, he said, "You remind me of myself after my wife passed. Same look in your eyes." I smiled faintly. "Except mine's still alive." "Doesn't matter," he said. "Loss is loss. The trick is learning to live with the space it leaves behind." That stuck with me. A few days later, I took a drive into town. There's a small community center that offers woodworking classes. I hadn't touched a tool since retiring, but something about building something new with my hands felt right. So, I signed up. The first day, I was nervous, surrounded by people half my age, laughing, chatting, full of energy. But when I started sanding a piece of oak, the smell of fresh wood filled the air, and for the first time in months, I forgot everything else. There was a woman in the class, Grace, maybe mid-50s, with streaks of grey in her dark hair. She had kind eyes, the kind that looked like they'd seen storms and still believed in sunrises. We didn't talk much, just shared tools, exchanged small smiles. Over the next few weeks, I started to look forward to those classes. Not because of her, not exactly, but because for 2 hours, I wasn't the man whose wife had cheated. I was just Dan, learning how to carve a birdhouse, sanding away the rough edges of something new. One afternoon, Grace said, "You're pretty good at this." I chuckled. "I've spent most of my life fixing broken things. Guess it carries over." She smiled. "Some things are worth fixing, some aren't." I nodded. "Yeah." Took me a while to figure that out. We talked after class sometimes about books, music, family. She'd lost her husband to cancer 5 years ago. She said she thought she'd never laugh again, but life had a way of surprising her. "Pain doesn't stay the same forever," she told me once. "It softens like old wood. You just have to let time do its work." I liked that. As the weeks turned into months, the aches started to dull. I stopped checking my phone for messages that would never come. I started sleeping through the night again. Even the guilt, the useless, heavy guilt of wondering if I'd failed her, somehow began to fade. One morning, I woke up early and looked at myself in the mirror. My hair had more grey than before, my face more lines. But there was something steady in my reflection, a quiet kind of strength I hadn't seen in years. I made coffee, stepped outside, and watched the sunrise over the lake. The sky was streaked with pink and gold. I remember thinking how beautiful it looked and how, for the first time in a long while, I didn't wish someone else was there to see it. Peace doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly, through mornings like that, through small kindnesses, through choosing to stay gentle, even when life hasn't been kind. One evening, Emily called. "Dad," she said, "Mum told me about the divorce. How are you holding up?" I hesitated. "Better than I thought I'd be." "I'm proud of you," she said. "You sound lighter." I smiled. "Maybe I am. Maybe losing everything made room for something new." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You deserve to be happy, Dad." "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I'm finally learning how." After we hung up, I sat by the window, guitar in hand, and played an old song Linda used to love. It didn't hurt anymore. The melody floated out into the night, gentle and forgiving. It wasn't a song about loss anymore. It was a song about surviving it. Autumn came early that year. The air turned crisp, the trees around the lake bleeding into shades of gold and copper. Every morning I'd walk along the water, coffee in hand, watching leaves drift and settle, like time itself slowing down. I'd been living at the inn for nearly 3 months, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel lost. The pain was still there, of course. It never really disappears. It just changes shape from something sharp into something quiet, like a scar that only aches when the weather turns cold. One afternoon, as I was sanding a piece of cedar for another woodworking project, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Still fixing things, huh?" I turned. It was Linda. For a moment, I just stared. She looked different, thinner, maybe, but softer somehow. Her hair was tied back, her eyes tired. There was no perfume, no polished makeup, no armor, just her. "Linda," I said finally, "what are you doing here?" "I called Emily," she said quietly. "She told me you were staying near the lake. I wanted to see you." I wiped my hands on a rag, unsure what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave. Another part, the part that still remembered 35 years of shared history, wanted to listen. So I gestured to the bench by the dock. "All right, let's talk." We sat down side by side, a small distance between us. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, calm and endless. "I'm not here to make excuses," she began. Her voice was steadier than I expected. "I just needed to tell you I'm sorry. Not for what happened, I can't undo that, but for how I hurt you. You didn't deserve any of it." I looked at her hands folded in her lap, the same hands that used to pour my coffee every morning, that once held our children when they were small. Time had changed them. Lines, freckles, faint tremors, but they were still hers. "I know," I said quietly. "I know you're sorry." She exhaled shakily. "I thought I knew what I wanted, Dan. I thought chasing something new, would make me feel alive again, but it didn't. It just made me realize what I'd lost. Her words hung in the air like leaves, suspended mid-fall. "Martin?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "It ended. Months ago. He wasn't what I thought. Maybe he never was. Or maybe I wasn't who I thought I was with him. Eduzixtu." I nodded, not out of pity, but understanding. She glanced at me. "You look good, you know. Happier." I smiled faintly. Guess I finally learned to breathe again. Silence settled between us. Not the heavy kind we used to share toward the end, but a gentler one. The kind that feels like acceptance. "I used to think forgiveness meant pretending it didn't happen," I said after a while. "But it's not that. It's remembering and still choosing peace." She blinked, her eyes glistening. "You forgive me?" "I do," I said simply. "Not because you earned it, but because I need it." She started to cry, quiet, trembling tears that she tried to hide. For a moment I thought about reaching out, wiping them away like I used to, but instead I let her cry. Some things have to be released before they can rest. We sat there until the sun began to set, turning the water orange and pink. Before she left, she stood and said, "I'm proud of you, Dan, for surviving this with grace. I don't know if I could have done the same." I looked up at her and said, "You would have. You're stronger than you think. You just got lost." She smiled sadly. "Goodbye, Dan." "Goodbye, Linda." And that was it. No dramatic hugs, no promises of staying friends, no final kiss. Just two people who'd shared a life, standing on the edge of it, finally ready to let each other go. When she drove away, I didn't cry. I just stood there, the evening wind brushing against my face, feeling the quietest kind of closure, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, just is. That night, I wrote in my journal again. Forgiveness isn't about setting them free, it's about setting yourself free from the version of you that couldn't let go. After that, life started unfolding gently, like pages turning themselves. I kept up with my woodworking, made a few pieces to sell at the town fair. Grace helped me set up the booth. She'd started to become a friend, someone who didn't ask for explanations or dwell on the past. One evening, as we packed up our things, she looked at the small birdhouse I'd made, cedar roof, carved initials on the side, and smiled. "You know," she said, "you've got a good heart, Dan. You just needed to build something new to remind yourself it still works." I laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to stop trying to rebuild what was gone." "Oh." She nodded. "That too." That night, I drove back to the lake and sat by the dock again. The moonlight danced on the surface, silver and calm. I thought about Linda, about the life we'd shared, about how love sometimes doesn't die, it just changes its form. She was still a part of me, not as my wife anymore, but as the woman who helped shape the man I'd become, the one who taught me that even broken hearts can beat steady again. When I got up to leave, I noticed something on the bench. A folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was from Linda. "Dan, thank you for seeing me, for forgiving me. I don't expect anything else. I just wanted you to know that despite everything, you were the best part of my life. Wiesen." I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my pocket. I didn't need to respond. The message wasn't meant to start anything new. It was meant to end something right. The next morning, I walked into the workshop early, sunlight slanting through the dusty windows. I placed a new block of wood on the table, smooth, uncut, untouched. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then I smiled. It felt like looking at the rest of my life, blank, solid, waiting to be shaped into something beautiful. I picked up my chisel and began. Winter came slow that year, creeping in quietly like an old friend who knows how to knock softly. The mornings turned colder, the lake froze along its edges, and frost painted lace patterns on the window panes of the inn. Most of the guests left after Thanksgiving, leaving the place hushed and empty. Just me, Mr. Harris, and his golden retriever Scout padding softly through the hallways. I liked it that way. Silence didn't scare me anymore. It became something I could sit with, like an old companion. I'd make coffee before sunrise, wrap a blanket around my shoulders, and step outside to watch the world wake up, breath fogging in the air, the smell of pine sharp and clean. One morning, as the first light broke through the trees, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was quieter than that, something steadier. It felt like peace settling in the bones. It had been 4 months since I'd last seen Linda. 4 months of learning to live without looking back. I didn't check her social media, didn't ask Emily or Michael for updates. The past no longer belonged to me. It belonged to time, and I had finally stopped trying to steal it back. Instead, I poured my heart into simple things: the sound of a saw cutting through wood, the rhythm of the lake waves, the soft creak of the dock under my boots. I found a kind of prayer in those sounds, a life measured not by what I'd lost, but by what I could still build. Around Christmas, Grace invited me to a small gathering at her home. A few neighbors, hot cider, quiet music. I almost said no. The thought of being around laughter and light still felt foreign, but something told me I should go. Her house was cozy, warm, in a way that didn't come from heat, but from the smell of cinnamon and something baking in the oven. When she opened the door, she smiled like I was someone she'd been waiting for. "Dan," she said, handing me a mug. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it," I replied, surprising even myself. We talked, laughed a little, shared stories about the past, not the painful parts, just the human ones. She told me about her late husband, how he used to hum Sinatra songs when he cooked. I told her about Linda's obsession with Christmas ornaments, how she'd pick one new one every year, each with a small story behind it. "Do you miss her?" Grace asked gently. I nodded. "Sometimes. Not the way I used to, though. It's not the ache anymore. It's gratitude. For the years we had, for the lessons I didn't know I needed." She smiled softly. "That's how you know you've healed." Le. The night went on with laughter and soft music. There was no spark, no sudden romance. Just connection, two people who'd been broken and still managed to show up anyway. And that, I realized, was enough. When I left her house that night, snow had begun to fall big, lazy flakes drifting down in silence. I walked slowly to my truck, letting the snow settle on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. I felt lighter. Life didn't need to be rebuilt all at once. Sometimes healing just means letting yourself stand still long enough for the pain to settle into memory. January passed quietly. I spent my days helping Mr. Harris repair the docks, taking Scout on long walks through the snow, and writing, not in the journal anymore that had served its purpose. I started writing short stories instead, little pieces about ordinary people trying to find their way back to themselves. One of them was about a man who built birdhouses after his wife left him. He didn't sell them. He just hung them around town, one by one, in parks and near schools, each with a small note that read, "For the birds and for the broken hearts that still learn to sing." Grace read that story one afternoon and smiled. "You should publish this," she said. I shook my head. "It's not meant for anyone else." She tilted her head. "Maybe it's meant for someone who needs it. You never know." Her words stayed with me. That night, I printed one of the stories and left it on the counter of the diner in town, tucked between sugar packets. A week later, the waitress told me someone had read it and cried. That's when I understood something powerful. Sometimes our pain becomes someone else's map. February brought thawing snow and brighter skies. I started going into town more, not to escape the inn, but to live again. I'd sit at the cafe, talk to strangers, listen more than I spoke. People carried stories everywhere, tucked in their laughter, hidden in their pauses. And the more I listened, the more I realized everyone is surviving something. One afternoon, Emily called. "Dad," she said, "I was thinking of bringing the girls down for spring break. They'd love to see the lake." My heart warmed instantly. "I'd love that," I said. "They can help me build something in the shop." When they arrived a few weeks later, the air smelled of thawed earth and pine sap. The girls ran straight to the water, their laughter echoing across the lake. Watching them felt like sunlight spilling into an old house, sudden, soft, and full of life. "Grandpa, can we make a birdhouse?" the youngest asked. Her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "Of course," I said, smiling, "but you have to promise to paint it bright, no dull colors." She giggled. "Deal." We spent the afternoon building it together. She held the nails. I guided her tiny hands with the hammer. It wasn't perfect, a little crooked, a little messy, but it was ours. When we finished, we hung it on a tree near the dock. As we stepped back to look at it, Emily said quietly, "Mum would have loved this." I didn't flinch. I didn't ache. I just nodded. "Yeah," I said softly. "She would have." That night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat by the water again. The stars reflected on the lake like scattered glass. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been: the husband, the father, the broken man, the one who thought life ended when love did. And I realized they'd all led me here to peace, to gratitude, to stillness. I whispered into the wind, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure who I was thanking. Maybe Linda, maybe life, maybe the quiet itself. When spring finally came, the lake thawed completely. The birdhouses I'd made through winter swung gently in the breeze, filled with the sounds of new beginnings. One morning, Grace stopped by the workshop with 2 cups of coffee. "Ready for your next project?" she asked. I smiled. "I think so. What's it going to be?" I looked out toward the lake, sunlight catching on the water. "Something simple," I said. "Something that reminds me life doesn't end when love changes, it just finds a different rhythm." She nodded, and for the first time, I realized my heart wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't full either, just open. And maybe that was the most peaceful place it could be. You know, when you reach 60, you start to think you've already lived all your big stories. You think the plot twists are done, the heartbreaks behind you, the lessons learned. But life always has one more page to turn. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that love doesn't always stay where you left it. Sometimes it walks away, sometimes it breaks, and sometimes it simply changes shape, turning into something quieter, like gratitude or peace. I used to think losing Linda was the end of my story, but it wasn't. It was the middle, the messy, painful middle that every real story needs before it can find its truth. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the hurt never happened. It means choosing to stop carrying it. It means waking up one morning, taking a deep breath and saying, "This pain has taught me enough. It can rest now." If you're listening to this, maybe you've been broken too. Maybe someone walked out on you, or betrayed your trust, or left you wondering what you did wrong. I want you to hear me when I say this. You are not what happened to you. You are what you do after it. The day I chose to forgive Linda, I wasn't setting her free. I was setting myself free from bitterness, from regret, from the version of me that thought happiness depended on someone else staying. Now, when I wake up by the lake and the sunlight hits the water just right, I feel something I didn't think I'd feel again. Stillness, gratitude, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of joy. So, if your heart is tired tonight, let it rest. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to rush to feel whole. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, quiet ways. And if you found a little bit of peace in my story, stay with me for the next one. Because sometimes the most beautiful chapters come after the heartbreak ends.